Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I wanted to thank the organizers, of course, the MGTC and the Ministry of Natural Resource and Environment, NREC, for allowing us to be part of this eventful function and to be able to share some perspectives in terms of how the company Edgenta sees the world in the context of climate change and in particular built environment. Today I'll also be joined by one of our more recent partners, Kaizen Property Management, who has joined the family and to be part and parcel of our ambition to take our customers, our clients, as well as the industry to the next level in the context of mitigating and adapting to climate change. So when we talk about mitigating and adapting to climate change, especially in the built environment, we always talk about the context of how the built environment is expected to be able to be more resilient in the context of what we're seeing today. So I will feature a little bit more about the work that we're doing in terms of mitigation. And in addition to that, Mr. Fadi will talk a little bit about the work that Kaizen Property Management, together with his participation in a UN global platform which is called Rise, in terms of how specifically the real estate sector is building in more resilience in terms of the context of adapting to climate change. So just a brief context about the company. I think we've been looking at properties and asset management for over 4 decades now. The fundamental bread and butter DNA of the organization is to be able to help organization look at managing assets in a more professional manner. And when we think about that, we talk about solutions that are driven to optimize costs, and obviously solutions that increases the value proposition in terms of our environment as well as the societal context. And of course, and more importantly, to be able to help curate a technology propositions that drive fundamentally what we talked about in terms of efficiency, in terms of resource management, both in buildings, healthcare facilities, infrastructure assets, culminating into what we call sustainable cities and sustainable communities. Now, if you look at Edgenta, one of the key fundamental levers for us is to be able to embed technology as part and parcel of how we actually drive our sustainable practices in relation to asset and property management. One of the key features when we have been tasked to manage facilities and properties is to be able to help track and monitor data that fundamentally looks at every single aspect of use of natural resources. Here we talk about waste, we talk about water, we talk about energy, and fundamentally look at ways to optimize the usage of these trifecta, we call it, in terms of natural resources in the use of assets as well as in the use of properties and facilities. We've developed multiple technology solutions that will be able to help clients as well as industry to be able to be a lot more agile in terms of managing natural resource. And together with the technology that we have put together in terms of the management of the facilities, we find significant ways of optimizing the use of natural resource. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, one of the examples that we have when we talk about mitigation, I'll just touch around 2 examples of how technology has helped significantly mitigate the impact to environment when it comes to built environment. One of the key measures that we look at is in terms of water conservation. And water conservation from understanding the use of water, particularly in the built environment, in the context of quality and in the context of public health. These areas of measurements help us inform not only the use of water in terms of the built environment, but also the impact of water discharge back to the sewage facility in terms of reducing and optimizing waste generated from grey water. The ability for us to track, monitor, and for us to be able to curate solutions in properties using technology that drives optimal water production is one of the key features that we look at as far as properties are concerned. The other example I wanted to touch on a little bit is on waste. Now, when we look at waste, similarly, we have a same concept in terms of how we optimize waste in buildings. And I'll share with you more examples later. In the context of energy, we've been spending a lot of time together with our clients, and I'll talk a little bit about the solutions that we have sort of worked on in terms of how industries, particularly asset owners, can integrate solutions and technology to drive better energy consumption. As we all know, about 40% of the emissions globally today are contributed by the built environment. More than 20% of that is being driven by basically the asset management, which is basically the act of running a facility, and the balance is being run by basically construction, which is also highly intensive in carbon emissions. Now, when we look at assets that are going to be there for 20, 30, 40 years, when we start building these assets, the ability to measure and monitor at point of use of this energy requirements becomes a very important factor. A lot of the work that we do in helping the asset owners to be able to optimize energy waste as well as water comes into the facets of the types of equipments that we use, the types of practices that we deploy during an asset management program, and of course technology to be able to help quantify the opportunity and the savings that we can get from these assets. In relation to sustainable buildings, especially in terms of how we look at the elements of sustainability in the context of mitigation, there are 4 key factors that comes together that comprises what we call asset management integrated system in looking at a built environment. The first one is looking at building systems. More importantly, I think today building systems are evolving in the context of how the built environment would require particular fundamental assets to behave more efficiently in the context of the economic life of the assets. Second is when we look at in terms of how we manage these assets, moving it from an input-based model to an output-based model. An output-based model where we can be more efficient in terms of allocation of resources, in terms of management of assets and reduction of use of natural resource, and at the same time being able to not only embed data as well as intelligence in terms of how we manage assets, but enable faster and better decision making. The life cycle, the third category is in terms of how we look at life cycle. So life cycle in short is basically what it would require for an asset owner to manage the facility over the 20, 30 years life of the assets. And that becomes a very critical component. Many, I would say, asset owners tend to basically focus on the construction and the development path. But when it comes to life cycle, it's something that is left towards the maintenance company to deal with it. One of the things that we place a significant emphasis when we look at asset management strategy is to be able to consider how long a gestation period are we required to optimize a particular facility when it comes to water, waste, as well as energy. And in terms of that, how do we optimize the planning of the resources that are required to cater to the longevity of the assets. And last but not least, I think we've seen an evolution of multiple context of certification, whether it is an audit and an assurance process that allows one to be able to recognize good quality assets, either through the LEED certification or some form of green building certification that gives an emphasis in terms of how the built environment continues to be an adapting measure towards more climate-friendly technology. Now, I'll just give a few examples here in the context of our built environment that we've been managing. The first one, we're proud managers of the Prime Minister's office in Malaysia, which is also what we call the Bangunan Perdana Putra. This facility has been managed by Edgenta for the last 15 years. And we've been able to not only invest to transform the building into a green GBI Platinum Index building, but being able to demonstrate the opportunity that we can manage building and reduce significant amount of resource consumption. So if you look at the optimization in terms of energy in itself, close to 50% reduction in energy that we've seen before and after optimization measures in building, particularly from an energy efficiency perspective. From a perspective in terms of water consumption, we've seen close to 30% reduction in terms of chill water consumption in the building. Of course, coupled with rainwater harvesting that we have embedded in the facility, we've been able to reduce the overall consumption of water, and more importantly, I think in terms of waste as well. Now, one of the key factors that we use to monitor a lot of the buildings that we have is the Building Energy Index, and that's a key measure. For platinum building, you tend to have energy index that are below 80, and that becomes a very critical component to be able to monitor and achieve, because that's part of your green certification that you would have to establish. Now, this building has obviously been accorded the platinum index for the last consecutive 9 years. We have recertification being done over the last 9 years in 2014, 2017, and 2021, and becomes a real example for the government of Malaysia, but at the same time for the industry in terms of how we can implement very strong mitigation measures towards adapting towards climate change. The other example that we've been working a lot is in the context of healthcare facilities. Now, our work closely with the Ministry of Health in Malaysia has enabled us to take legacy hospitals, hospitals that are built even during colonial era, to a point that facilities are, I would say, a lot more traditional, by imbuing new technology and enhancing the credibility and the credentials of this technology to be a lot more climate friendly. We manage close to 60 hospitals in Malaysia. In the north, about 30 hospitals, and together with our partners in Sabah and Sarawak, we manage close to 30 hospitals there as well. And being able to take these hospitals to the next level in terms of sustainability, again, in terms of water use, waste reduction, and also in terms of energy efficiency, are one of the things that we worked actively. Last year alone, I think we took 3 hospitals to be a platinum index hospitals. And these are legacy hospitals that were built in the 20s. Most of these hospitals were built in the 1920s. And so the ability to retrofit, integrate new technology becomes a very key component. And the beauty of these investments, they're all paid for, because if you think about the savings that you generate from the energy reduction, from the optimization of water, as well as the reduction in waste, they're all costs that ultimately reduces as a result of actions or active actions that you take in managing these resources. And so a lot of the programs that we do for the government as well as the private sector has embedded basically what we call a zero capex financing program, where clients don't have to invest as a result, because players or companies like Edgenta and any other partners that we have in the ecosystem will invest in return for sharing of savings of this energy or water consumption. Last example I wanted to highlight is in terms of how we work with our partners here in the Middle East, particularly in the UAE, as well with our partners in Malaysia, where we don't actually undertake the property or facility management. So here, we are acting as a technology implementer and enabler for our clients to be able to increase the value proposition by virtue of data. So Twin Towers, for example, if you look at the work that we do there with Petronas and KLCC Urus Harta, we've seen the ability to adapt and use technology that ultimately reduces energy, optimizes waste, and more importantly, create a better environment for the end user occupants. In Dubai, for example, we work closely with Wasl, which is one of the state-owned property developer. And here, if you look at the benefits that we have generated through the use of technology, it includes and it extends beyond basically the traditional natural resource that we manage, including customer satisfaction, as well as improving tenant satisfaction over time. Last but not least, I think in summary, I wanted to talk a little bit about the elements of how we've helped the ability for asset owners and asset managers to be able to integrate technology and reduction of climate from a mitigation perspective into the use of built environment, and becomes a very, very key component going forward. I think Fadi will talk a little bit about measures where real estate sectors are taking action when it comes to adaptation on climate change as a result of the change that we're seeing in the environment. Both these factors become equally important. One, to mitigate, reduce consumption, and manage basically overall emissions, and one that actually looks at an ability to adapt, because the environment is expected to change. And with the changing environment, we have to expect the built environment to be a lot more robust and resilient in terms of being able to adapt to the changing climate. With that, I would like to thank all of you for being here today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'll pass the speaker to Mr. Fadi.
Thank you, Rais. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today and for listening to us. I'm here today to present a tool that we've created with the United Nations Arise. I'll start by giving you just a quick introduction of who we are and who United Nations Arise is. So Kaizen is a purpose-driven organization. Our purpose is to add value to people's lives, and our mission is to add value to properties and the people that live within that. We help landlords acquire, manage, and operate real estate portfolios across the UAE with a portfolio of around $6 billion under management as of date. What is ARISE? ARISE stands for Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies, and we have an acronym which is ACT NOW, Be Resilient, Create Impact, Help Societies, and Expand Your Network. The members of ARISE have committed to voluntarily support the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which spans between 2015 and 2030. So we work very closely. We're part of the United Nations disaster risk reduction, and we work very closely with the United Nations on disaster risk. ARISE in the UAE was formed in September 2020. I'm part of the original board members of ARISE. It was interesting because we formed it during COVID lockdown actually. So it was a very interesting time to look at resilience and interesting time to look at adaptability. Our objective, I'm not going to go into details. I think we're all here in COP28 talking about climate change and the need to be resilient. But the focus and the initiative is to really focus on enhancing the overall resilience across 4 particular work areas. One is SMEs, and then insurance companies, investors, and infrastructure. Why SMEs? SMEs are actually the most vulnerable companies when it comes to climate change and when it comes to any disaster. They're usually the least prepared. They usually rarely do they have actually business continuity plans and emergency preparedness plans, and that creates a major risk for the general population because globally 99% of companies are SMEs and 1 in 3 people work for an SME. In the UAE alone, 89% of the population works for small and medium enterprises. So the need to be resilient is even more of a key. And also we focus on SMEs because SMEs drive the innovation and provide the solutions that a lot of us here see today to combat climate change and and bring in more sustainability. We also work with investors to try and integrate disaster and climate risk in their financial investment decisions and making sure that they integrate that as part of their investment analysis and investment decisions. We look at insurance and in particular reinsurance to make sure there are the right products in place to ensure SMEs and all other stakeholders against climate change and against natural disasters. And to also work with insurance to encourage risk-informed business strategies and practices. And last but not least, on infrastructure, as we know, there's about $90 trillion that are being invested in infrastructure by 2030, and it is critical that also the investments in infrastructure are actually risk-informed when it comes to climate change. Now, there has been a lot of different outcomes of our work with the United Nations Arise, and one of those outcomes was a tool that we created for the real estate industry, a resilience measurement tool that we created for the real estate industry. This tool was created in coordination with the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, as well as with FIAPSI, the Global Federation of Real Estate, which has over 1 million members globally, and with the engineering company Arup in the UK. And Kaizen, the company I represent today, actually worked throughout this whole process in creating the tool very closely with Arup and the United Nations, We piloted it multiple times across our projects before we made the tool public. Why did we focus on real estate? So as we know, we spend 90% of our lives in buildings, whether at work or in exhibitions like today or at home. 90% of our lifetime is spent in buildings. And as we saw when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of companies, a lot of landlords, a lot of property management companies were not prepared for a disaster or a pandemic or for a sudden shock. So what we have done is, with this tool, we made a tool that is very simple to use, free. It's an Excel-based tool that everyone can use to start measuring the resilience of the buildings, whether it's a commercial building or a residential building. And why is that important? Well, first and foremost, security and safety of the people. And I think we can see from the different natural disasters happening around the world, we need to be more prepared. Communities need to be more prepared. Financial security, health and well-being, sustainable living, and most importantly, adaptability to change. The tool goes around three particular segments, and very similar to the presentation we saw before from one of the Khazana companies. So step one is understanding the key contributors to resilient real estate. B is assessing the company's performance against these contributors. And C is utilizing this information for better preparedness. The tool itself is qualitative in nature. It enables multiple groups of people to work together on assessing the sustainability of a particular building or a particular community. It gauges the strengths and weaknesses among different factors. It acts as a compass and provides a framework and a roadmap towards resilience. And last but not least, it helps companies and properties prioritize resilience and performance based on actual priorities. The tool dimensions looks at 6 different dimensions. One is asset and infrastructure, economy and finance, natural and urban systems, society and well-being, governance and leadership, and last but not least, strategy and innovation. When we look at each of these factors, there are about 5 to 20 different questions that are being asked under each of these factors. I obviously don't have time to go through all of them, but I've chosen a few samples to present to you today. So on asset and infrastructure, there are questions being asked as to whether the asset is ready for extreme heat or extreme cold. One of the interesting parts that we started realizing out of the tool was that in the UAE, we are not prepared for extreme cold. If we get temperatures under 10 degrees, you probably have a lot of people that will get sick or probably even die in those cold conditions, because we don't have heating systems in our houses or in our buildings. Assets and infrastructures are equipped to handle disruptions and spikes in demand. As we saw again in the COVID pandemic, in high-rise buildings, there was a spike in demand in utilizing the assets in the building. So obviously, when we look at resilience, we look at different scenarios as to whether buildings are prepared for different scenarios of spikes in demand. Making sure critical services have backup systems, especially for ventilation, electricity, and IT. Prioritizing comfort and air quality, which is a topic that we realized we were vulnerable with when it came to the pandemic, as, for example, the air going around from one apartment to another, and people were afraid that they're going to get the virus from their neighbors just through the air conditioning system. So the tool allows you to think about these factors and to brainstorm risks and also solutions. Economy and finance, the tools look at assessing the quality and processes thoroughly for adaptability, making sure that landlords and property operators evaluate resilience costs and their long-term value impact. As we know, a lot of landlords prioritize short-term objectives against long-term objectives. So what we found that this tool has really helped us engage with landlords and have a conversation about what is it that they need to do and invest in today in order to improve the resilience of their projects. It makes the conversation a lot easier with decision makers. On natural and urban systems, we looked at assessing operations' impact on the plant and animal life, preventing harm to nature, mitigating pressure or hazard on assets, cutting down on resources or certain products to extend the lifespan of assets and reduce carbon footprint. On society and well-being, we looked at different factors, one of which was things like during the pandemic and the lockdown, having access to certain healthcare and having access to certain needs within the community was actually critical, and communities that did not have such access were more vulnerable to the effects of the pandemic. So looking at the society and well-being of residents from that angle, establishing backup suppliers and backup teams in cases of emergencies and natural disasters, ensuring that everyone is aware of the threats that are there and the uncertainties that are there. On governance and leadership, we looked at maintaining adaptability and continuity plans, assessing and reviewing hazards and interactions, streamlining contracts and prioritizing social and environmental impact. And last but not least, on strategy and innovation, is making sure everyone, especially the top leaders in the organization, are aware of the risks that are there in relation to climate change and what the potential solutions are and mitigation factors, and making sure decisions are made to mitigate those risks. And we found that this tool was extremely helpful because it's simple to use with decision makers to make decisions about what needs to happen to mitigate certain risks in properties. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you.